It was just another quiet evening at home until the phone call came and turned our world upside down. Marcus and I were sitting at the dinner table, enjoying the salmon and roasted potatoes I'd made, when his cell phone started buzzing. He glanced at the screen and froze. "Who is it?" I asked. "It's Selena," he said grimly. Selena, his 19-year-old daughter from his disastrous first marriage who he hadn't spoken to in years. My heart sank. Nothing good could come of this. Marcus answered the call and I studied his face as he listened, his eyes narrowing in concern. After a few terse words, he hung up and let out a long sigh. "What did she want?" I asked, bracing myself. "She's coming to live with us. Her roommate kicked her out, so she's driving here tomorrow." I dropped my fork, my appetite vanishing. "Here? For how long?" She didn't say, but it sounded like she plans to stay indefinitely. I felt the panic rising in my chest. We'd worked so hard to build a good life, a stable home. Marcus and I both came from broken families, rife with lies and betrayals. It had taken years of therapy and trust building to heal those wounds. The last thing we needed was a destructive, entitled 19-year-old tearing open those scars again. "Can't her mother take her in?" I asked. Marcus shook his head. "You know how that went. The divorce was nuclear. They haven't spoken since." Before I could object further, we heard the front door open. Our 16-year-old son Eli walked in, home from basketball practice. He joined us at the table, his wavy brown hair damp with sweat. "Hey, Mom, Dad, what's going on?" he asked, detecting the tension immediately. He was an exceptionally perceptive kid. Marcus gave him a tired smile. "We just got a call from your sister Selena. She's going to be staying with us for a while." Eli's eyes widened in surprise. He knew little about Selena, other than the few bitter stories Marcus had told over the years. Okay, Eli said slowly. "How long is she staying?" "We don't know yet," Marcus admitted. An uneasy silence settled on the room. I could imagine the worried thoughts spinning through Eli's mind. Selena's sudden arrival would disrupt the stability he valued so deeply, but he was too kind-hearted to voice those concerns. I reached over and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Then I turned to Marcus, my eyes flashing with determination. "We need to set firm ground rules," I said. "No freeloading or taking advantage. If she wants to stay here, she needs to get a job and contribute." Marcus nodded. "You're right. I'll make that clear when she arrives." But as we cleaned up the remains of dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing good would come from Selena's return. The past has a way of catching up, even if you barricade the door. The next morning I woke up feeling uneasy. Today was the day Selena would arrive. Marcus had cleared out the small guest room for her, but I doubted she'd be happy with the cramped space. Over breakfast, Marcus tried reassuring Eli. "Don't worry, I'm sure Selena has grown up a lot since I last saw her. Just try to make her feel welcome." Eli nodded, but I could tell he was dreading her arrival as much as I was. Around noon, we heard a car pull up outside. "That must be her," Marcus said. My heart pounded as we went to the front door. A blonde girl stepped out of a beat-up hatchback jammed with clothes and boxes. She looked nothing like the sullen, scrawny 13-year-old I remembered from the divorce hearings years ago. She'd grown tall and pretty, wearing stylish clothes and expertly applied makeup. But her bright smile didn't reach her eyes. Marcus hugged her awkwardly. "Welcome home, Selena." "Thanks, Daddy," she said sweetly, though she'd made no effort to contact him since the divorce. "It's so good to see you again." Over the next hour, Selena carried in her boxes and bags, piling them in the small guest room despite the lack of space. She rejected Marcus's offers to help, barking at him not to touch her things. So much for her growing up, I thought. At dinner, Selena dominated the conversation, chatting about herself and sprinkling in subtle insults toward me. "I can't believe you're still working as a nurse, Lena. Wouldn't you rather do something more interesting?" I bit my tongue. Nursing was my passion, but Selena clearly looked down on it. When Eli talked about applying for college scholarships, Selena laughed sharply. "Good luck getting enough money to attend a decent school." Eli's face burned. I knew how hard he'd worked for those scholarships, maintaining straight A's while excelling at sports. After dinner, I pulled Marcus aside. "We need to set ground rules for Selena," I urged. "No more of this entitled behavior." He sighed. "You're right, I'll talk to her." But over the next few days, nothing changed. Selena continued acting rudely, while doing nothing to get a job or help around the house. My patience wore dangerously thin. Then came the final straw. I arrived home from work one evening to find Selena gone and Eli sitting alone, his face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked. "She stole my laptop, and my money jar was empty." His lower lip trembled. "There was over $500 in there from my job." Rage boiled inside me. That money represented years of Eli's hard work and sacrifice. When Selena finally swanned in, I confronted her. "Give back Eli's money and his laptop now." She smirked. "Or what? You'll kick me out." I wanted to slap that smug look off her face. But violence wouldn't solve anything. Selena was toxic, destroying all she touched. I had to protect my family from her, even if it meant driving away Marcus's daughter for good. I decided right then and there. Selena had to go. Her toxic behavior was destroying our family, and I refused to let that continue. When Marcus came home, I told him what Selena had done. She stole from her own brother after we opened our home to her. "I want her out, Marcus. Today." He looked pained. "I know Selena's behavior is unacceptable, but she's still my daughter. If we kick her out now, she'll have nowhere to go." "So we just let her keep stealing from us?" I cried. "She's manipulating you. Can't you see that?" "Give me a little more time to work things out with her," Marcus pleaded. "With some boundaries, I think Selena can change." I shook my head in frustration. Marcus's parental guilt was blinding him to Selena's true nature. But I had to pick my battles carefully to avoid damaging my marriage. "1 week," I said. "If her behavior doesn't improve drastically in 1 week, she has to leave." Marcus agreed reluctantly. I only hoped we could limit the damage Selena inflicted before then. But over the next few days, things only got worse. Selena stayed out partying all night, then slept past noon. She helped herself to my jewelry, claimed they were just loans. When I demanded she get a job, she scoffed. "Why work when Daddy lets me stay here for free?" One night, I came home to find her smoking on the couch. When I yelled at her to take it outside, she blew smoke in my face. "You're not my mother. Don't tell me what to do." I felt sick, realizing the extent of Selena's manipulation. She knew exactly how to provoke me while acting sweetly innocent around Marcus. The final straw came when I received a call from my credit card company, asking about a suspicious purchase. Over $2,000 at a luxury clothing store in LA. It didn't take a genius to realize Selena had stolen my card. She'd racked up more debt in a week than Eli and I spent on food in a month. When Marcus came home, I confronted him, shaking with rage. "Your daughter is destroying us. I want her out of this house tonight." Marcus's face was haggard. "You're right." I wanted to believe Selena could change, but clearly she's out of control. "It's me or her, Marcus," I said quietly. "Choose carefully." He pulled me into a hug. "You and Eli will always come first. I just pray we can get through this without tearing our family apart." We sat down with Selena, and Marcus told her she had to move out immediately. She flew into a rage, hurling insults and accusations. I stayed silent, letting Marcus handle his deranged daughter. When Selena stomped off to pack her things, Marcus put his head in his hands. "I'm so sorry I brought this madness into our home," he said. "You and Eli mean everything to me. However long it takes, I promise we'll recover from Selena's poison." I squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his words. With unity, we would survive this trial. Selena's twisted schemes could not break our family. The weeks after kicking out Selena were tense. Marcus tried calling her several times, but she refused to speak with him. I knew he was torn up with guilt, blaming himself for how she'd turned out. I tried reassuring him we'd done the right thing. Selena was like a tornado, destroying all in her path. We changed the locks and canceled my stolen credit card. The bank's fraud department was understanding, agreeing to waive the bogus charges. Slowly, our lives regained a sense of normalcy. Then the letter came, shattering that fragile peace all over again. It was from a bank I'd never heard of, thanking me for opening a new credit account. My breath caught in my throat as I read the attached paperwork. Someone had applied for a personal loan in my name, forging my signature on the forms. $15,000 already deposited into an unknown account. My hands shook with anger and panic. That amount of debt could devastate our family, and there was only one person who would stoop so low. When Marcus came home, I thrust the letter at him. "Your daughter is trying to destroy us. We need to call the police." His eyes widened in shock as he read the letter. My God, I know Selena has issues, but outright identity theft? He slumped at the table, head in his hands. This is all my fault. I failed her as a father. My anger thawed slightly. As much as Selena infuriated me, I knew this betrayal devastated Marcus even more. I sat down beside him. You did your best with her under terrible circumstances. Some people just refuse to change. But now we need to focus on protecting ourselves and Eli. Will you call the police to report the fraud? Marcus sighed heavily, but nodded. You're right. I need to do the responsible thing, no matter how painful. We spent an agonizing hour on the phone with the police and bank, filing reports about Selena's crime. It still boggled my mind that the smiling little girl I remembered from Marcus's wedding photos could grow into this heartless criminal. The bank investigator informed us the loan had been taken out locally, meaning Selena was still lurking nearby. The thought made my skin crawl. That night, as we lay in bed, I turned to Marcus. We'll get that loan invalidated. The bank believes we're the victims here. I hope you're right, he said. Because if not, this could financially devastate us. We could even lose the house. The unspoken fear hung heavy between us. Selena wasn't content just poisoning her father's memory of her. She aimed to completely destroy his new family, no matter the cost. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I repeated a silent mantra. Selena's scheming couldn't touch us, no matter how hard she tried. Goodness and truth would prevail. But in my heart, I harbored a cold anger I'd never felt before. If Selena continued threatening my loved ones, I would stop at nothing to take her down. Over the next few weeks, we heard nothing from Selena. The bank was investigating the fraudulent loan, buying us time before the debts came due. The police had tried visiting Selena's last known address, but she'd already vacated her apartment, leaving no trace. Marcus spent hours scouring online records, trying to find where Selena had disappeared to, but it seemed she knew how to avoid being caught. A true con artist. Then on a sunny Saturday, everything changed again. Marcus was at a weekend teaching conference, so Eli and I decided to see a movie together. But when we returned home, I instantly sensed something was wrong. The front door was ajar. My pulse pounded as I rushed inside. Eli closed behind. Wait in the hall, I told him. If Selena was lurking inside, I didn't want Eli getting hurt. I crept forward, peering into the darkened rooms. At first, nothing seemed disturbed. Then I reached Eli's bedroom. The entire room had been ransacked. Dresser drawers flung open, mattress upended, closet ransacked. Eli rushed in behind me, crying out in shock. That's when I saw the paper on his bed scrawled with a taunting message, "College fund gone. Oops, better start bussing tables, loser brother." Red spots swam before my eyes. The college fund Marcus and I had painstakingly built for Eli, untouched until now nearly $20,000 for his future, was gone, stolen by Selena to fund her extravagant tastes, while she left crude insults for the brother she'd never bothered to know. I heard a strangled sob behind me. Eli's face was white, eyes glittering with tears. All that money you saved for me, gone. I wrapped my arms around my kind, diligent son, so undeserving of this cruelty. We'll figure this out, I promised. But inside, my blood boiled. That money was meant to give Eli a chance at a better life. And Selena had snatched that dream away without a second thought. When Marcus arrived, he broke down at the violation of our home and Eli's loss. I rarely saw my soft-spoken husband enraged, but today his fury mirrored my own. Our savings drained, our locks picked, our son senselessly tormented. Enough was enough. Selena had to face consequences before she destroyed more innocent lives. The next evening, ignoring Marcus's warnings, I drove to the rundown motel where Selena was rumored to be staying. Sure enough, I spotted her beat-up hatchback out front. I banged on her door until she finally opened it, smirking when she saw me. Well, if it isn't St. Lena, come to preach about morality? I slapped her across the face. You absolute monster, I spat. Wasn't ruining our lives once enough for you? Selena's grin vanished. You'll regret that, Butch, she hissed, lunging toward me. We scuffled briefly before I shoved her back inside, slamming the door in her contorted face. I strode away, trembling but resolute. One way or another, Selena's reign of terror ended today. I had given her every chance to change. But some people rotted from the inside out, beyond hope of redemption. Dragging them from the darkness risked them pulling you down into their depths. Selena had proven herself a soulless parasite, incapable of goodness. Now it was time to excise her from our lives for good, before her fangs struck again. In the weeks after my confrontation with Selena, I waited on edge for her retaliation. Marcus increased security around our home. I pulled Eli from school, not wanting him alone until Selena was apprehended. But as days passed with no sign of her, we began to breathe easier. Maybe she had realized her crimes would catch up with her if she stayed in town. Then, late one night, I awoke to blaring fire alarms. Marcus and I rushed to Eli's room and found it filled with smoke, flames licking up one wall. We grabbed Eli and raced outside, moments before the fire engulfed his bedroom. As firefighters extinguished the blaze, suspicion gnawed at me. This was no electrical mishap. Selena had made her final, desperate play for revenge. The police investigation confirmed my fears. Traces of gasoline had been splashed along one side of the house and ignited. A disturbing amount, enough to incinerate us as we slept if the timing had been slightly off. Marcus's face was haggard as he spoke to the investigators. My daughter Selena Rogers is your arson suspect. We have evidence she committed identity theft and burglary against us. This fire was her latest attempt to harm my family. With the troubling revelations about Selena's escalating crimes, the police finally took serious action. They obtained security footage from nearby cameras, showing a figure in Selena's car fleeing the neighborhood right before firefighters arrived. Arrest warrants were issued. Selena's name and photo were distributed to local media, labeling her an armed and dangerous fugitive. Marcus even made a direct plea for Selena to turn herself in, promising she'd still receive due process. But Selena remained in hiding, our lives frozen in limbo as we waited for the snake to strike again. I stayed locked indoors with Eli, rifles and fire extinguishers within reach. She'd taken so much from us already. I refused to let her steal our sanity, too. Then late one evening, I got an unexpected call from the lead detective on our case, his voice urgent. You need to check the news right away. Selena Rogers was just apprehended. I grabbed Marcus and Eli, and we turned on the TV with trembling hands. A breaking news report showed Selena in handcuffs outside a pawn shop, stolen jewelry and electronics scattered at her feet. The very items she'd looted from our home. She cursed and spat at reporters as police stuffed her in a squad car. Selena had grown so convinced of her own invincibility that she'd slipped up and gotten caught red-handed. As the reporters recounted Selena's shocking crimes against her own family, her reputation lay in tatters, the real monster exposed underneath the pretty surface. I almost pitied her. Almost. That night, with Selena in a cell and our home protected, we finally slept in peace. The next weeks would be difficult, untangling the wreckage Selena left behind. But the storm had passed. Her lies could haunt us no more. A new dawn had broken, full of promise and hope. In the weeks after Selena's arrest, we slowly regained a sense of normalcy. With Selena locked up on multiple felony charges, the dark cloud that had choked our home finally lifted. I took Eli out for belated birthday celebrations at his favorite restaurants. Marcus and I spent evenings reminiscing about happier times before Selena's arrival. We started making plans to repair the fire damage and replenish our drained finances. There were still court dates looming. Marcus agonized over having to testify against his eldest daughter, no matter how estranged they'd become. I tried to steel my heart, reminding myself of all the suffering Selena had inflicted. Then we received shocking news. While in jail awaiting her trial, Selena had gotten into a violent fight with another inmate. The details were murky, but the results were clear. Selena was dead. Marcus took the news hardest of all. He locked himself in our room for days, torn apart with guilt. I focused my energy on comforting Eli, who despite everything felt saddened at the loss of a sister he'd never known. In the weeks that followed, we learned more disturbing details about Selena's final days. The inmate she'd clashed with claimed Selena had bragged about the rush she got from deceiving people, saying she wished she'd stolen triple the amount from us. Hearing Selena's callous words helped harden my heart. She'd felt no remorse for destroying lives. In the end, her greed and aggression had collided with someone equally vicious. With Selena gone, the case against her unraveled quickly. The bank rescinded her bogus loan applications, removing that crushing debt burden. the police helped retrieve some of our stolen funds from her apartment and storage unit. At the same time, sympathies poured in from our community, people horrified at Selena's behavior once her crimes became public. Many had known Marcus and I as a loving couple and parents for over a decade. They rallied around us, raising money to help Eli pay his college tuition. Their generosity stunned me. After writhing in Selena's web of isolation and deceit, the support of true friends felt like waking up from a nightmare. I saw it dawn on Marcus, too. We were not alone. Good people could conquer evil together. On the anniversary of Selena's death, we visited her grave for the first and only time. Marcus knelt by the modest stone and whispered a prayer. I stood back with Eli, giving them space. She wasn't born bad, Eli said quietly. Do you think if she'd made different choices, she could have been happy? I hugged my wise son close. I think we all forge our own path. Selena chose destruction, but life marches on. Now we walk in the light again. Marcus joined us, finally looking at peace. He took my hand, a gentle smile on his face. Thank you for staying by my side, he said. Your love guided me out of the darkness. Together, we turned and walked into the sunset, leaving Selena's tempestuous ghost behind. The future awaited, bright and full of hope. In the months after Selena's death, our family slowly healed. The fire damage was repaired, stolen money recovered, debts settled. Bit by bit, we reclaimed what Selena had tried destroying. But some wounds aren't visible. I woke choking from nightmares of flames engulfing our home. Marcus withdrew into himself for days at a time, brooding with guilt, and Eli became quieter, jumping at small noises and keeping his bedroom door locked. So I suggested we start seeing a family counselor. At first, Marcus resisted, ashamed at needing help, but eventually he agreed it was necessary to fully mend our battered spirits. Our sessions proved intensely cathartic. We spoke of betrayal, violation, anger. The counselor taught us coping techniques for anxiety and PTSD. He urged us to vocalize our feelings rather than bottling them up, which had strained my relationship with the brooding Marcus. I discovered depths of pain in Marcus I'd never realized. He admitted part of his desperation to help Selena stemmed from regret over his failures with her as a child during his divorce. The counselor eased his shame, reframing his efforts as misguided rather than malicious. For Eli, the greatest solace came from restoring normal routines. He rejoined school sports teams, volunteered at a homeless shelter, and took a part-time job at an ice cream parlor. Focusing on productivity and community engagement helped alleviate his sense of helplessness. 6 months later, with our counselor's approval, we decided to close the book on our tribulations with Selena. We used the last of her recovered stolen money to take a family trip to Hawaii, visiting breathtaking beaches and eating decadent dinners. No friction, no drama, just joyful quality time together. On the final night, Marcus and I renewed our vows on the beach under a sunset, Eli proudly officiating. I gazed lovingly at my two men, my champions. Selena had tried tearing us apart. Instead, we'd emerged stronger than ever. Not all scars fully disappear, but you can choose to wear them proudly, refusing to let past pain define you. Our family embodied that resilience. On the plane ride home, I penned a journal entry I later shared with Marcus and Eli. The past year contained agonizing trials, but also profound growth. We cling closer now, wounds healed into wisdom. Selena acted as a wicked knife, slicing open old injuries and inflicting new ones. But we three are the stitching, holding fast, binding up the cuts, making whole what was rent. Our imperfect family will not just survive, but thrive. The darkness recedes, healing dawns, and the light everlasting remains. Later that week, I tucked my journal away in a keepsake box. The final remnants of Selena's ruination, trial transcripts, bank statements, police reports, went into the trash for good. Marcus hugged me close. It's finally over, he said. Now we build something beautiful from the ashes. I smiled up at my husband, then pulled Eli into our embrace. The storm had passed, our lives stretched ahead, sunny and bright, and we would walk this new path arm in arm, faces tilted toward the light.
My name is Luna. I'm a 25-year-old employee. My grandfather, who raised me, passed away 6 months ago. Today is the day when the lawyer will open my grandfather's will. That's why I was visiting my grandfather's house with my sister Susan. who was 4 years older and is my only family. Our parents passed away in an accident 20 years ago, and since then, we were raised by our grandparents. Since my grandmother passed away from an illness a few years ago, my grandfather's spirits have been declining year by year, and he became frequently ill. Out of concern, I lived in an apartment near my grandfather's house and often went back to check on him. "You're a grown woman. It's unbecoming to keep coming back home," my grandfather would say, but he would always laugh cheerfully nonetheless. Then one day, as I went to visit like I usually did, I found my grandfather lying in pain at the entrance. In a panic, I called the ambulance, but my grandfather passed away, just like that. "Hey, what are you daydreaming for? At least prepare some tea." My sister's voice brought me back to reality. "Right. The lawyer will be here soon," I responded and headed to the kitchen. Taking a quick glance, I saw my sister lazily stretching out her legs on the mat and yawning. I could still smell my sister's strong perfume even in the kitchen, a bit away, and I made a face. "She's the same as always," I murmured under my breath, placing the kettle on the stove. My sister has always been the type to only care about herself. Once she hit her teens, she started dyeing her hair as if it were natural. She hung out with the so-called delinquents and was always out and about, demanding money without working. Part-time was a given. Even when she caused trouble and our grandparents had to apologize on her behalf, she was unperturbed. I, being the quiet one, often had to deal with the fallout. She doesn't seem to have changed much even after becoming an adult. She doesn't have a stable job and seems to just be drifting around while working part-time. I knew she had been asking our grandfather for money whenever I wasn't around. It was easy to imagine that she would have found this all too troublesome if it weren't for the inheritance. "Ah, you must be the lawyer. Thanks for coming today." I heard my sister's high-pitched formal voice, indicating that the lawyer had arrived. I hurriedly placed tea leaves into the teapot and headed towards the entrance. "Thank you for coming today." I had met the lawyer at the funeral. His eyes were as kind as my grandfather's. A lawyer's badge shone brightly on his chest. After offering incense in front of my grandfather's portrait, he took a sip of the tea I served and then took out my grandfather's will. It was entrusted to him by my grandfather while he was still alive. The content was as follows. My elder sister Susan was to inherit $20 million in cash, and I, the younger daughter, was to inherit this house and the land it sits on. Upon hearing this, my sister burst out laughing. $20 million in cash for the elder daughter and only an old house for the younger one? How hilarious. It's just right for someone as plain as you. "It's not just the house. There's also the land," I retorted, to which my sister laughed snidely. "Huh? The value of this land in such a God-forsaken place is hardly surprising. Ah, I would have preferred cash, I guess. Grandpa must have had a soft spot for me after all. I can't deny that I am a bit shocked. I suppose my grandfather wanted me to protect his beloved house and land where he spent his life with my grandmother. Huh, a house and land. That's pretty awesome, isn't it?" Brian, my boyfriend, exclaimed in surprise after hearing my story. I shook my head, implying it's not as great as it sounds. Not really. My sister inherited $20 million in cash. That's more impressive. I felt a sense of emptiness saying it out loud. Even though I was being modest, verbalizing it felt like an acknowledgement. Wow, beautiful and have money now. She's the more morose, the better victory. I shot Brian a side glance for his insensitive comment. Realizing his gaffe, he joked, "Your comfort means more to me than money, Luna." Brian has been my boyfriend since I started working. We met at a social event, and being of the same age, we clicked well. I've introduced him to my grandfather and my sister. While he hasn't proposed yet, I have been considering marriage. Today was our first date in a while, and I ended up telling Brian about my inheritance. I suppose it was because I thought he would become my husband someday. I had no idea I would come to regret this. A few days later, I was visiting the family home I had inherited from my grandfather. I had intended to clean and sort out my grandfather's belongings. The property was large, but the house was modest. I figured I could manage it on my own and looked around the house, pondering. It's close to my workplace. Maybe I should move here. Living here leisurely with a cat doesn't sound too bad. There would be no rent to pay, and while there might be maintenance costs for deterioration, I have been working hard and saving, so it shouldn't be a problem. Maybe someday with Brian. Feeling embarrassed at the thought, I shook my head vigorously. I rolled up my sleeves to begin cleaning. Just then, I received a call. My sister's name appeared on my smartphone screen. Sis, what's up? Hey, Luna, having fun all by yourself in that old house? My sister seemed to be drunk. She always had a unique way of extending her words. But today, it was particularly bad. Since you're drinking, aren't you? It's still afternoon, I pointed out with a sigh, to which she exaggeratedly sighed back. Oh, you're such a Miss Goody Two-Shoes. I was right. She had been drinking. I was thinking about moving here eventually. I answered my sister's question, hoping to end the conversation quickly. Really? I'm enjoying a suite in a luxury hotel right now. My sister raised her voice in a somewhat exaggerated way. Guess who I'm with right now? I have no idea. Boring. It's that kind of attitude that'll make Brian dislike you. What? I'm sorry, Luna. I was flabbergasted when Brian's voice took over the line. The sudden intervention of Brian threw me off balance. Dizzying question marks popped up in my head, but I resented my imagination. At this point, a disgusting imagination had been completed in my head. Surprised, huh? My sister's mean-spirited voice chimed in. Ever since you introduced him to me, I thought Brian was quite a catch. She rattled off boastfully about how she had been attracted to Brian since I introduced him, how she knew where he worked because of me, and how she had approached him as soon as he left work. He came along readily when she asked. He told her that she was hundreds of times more attractive than me. I listened in stunned silence. Luna, I'm really sorry. The next voice I heard was Brian's again. Tell me it's a mistake. As I tried to utter words that wouldn't come, he spoke again. As a man, I had to take this opportunity. What? I do feel bad about it, but come on, it's impossible to resist a beautiful woman who has $20 million, right? The way he spoke, as if asking me to understand, drained my emotions away. I felt a cold sensation, like my blood was being drained from me. You know what? I don't need a man like you. At my words, I could hear my sister laughing uproariously in the background. The voice on the phone changed back to my sister. Well, that's how it is. And from now on, let's not consider ourselves sisters, okay? I wouldn't want you turning to me just because you're broke. With those words, she ended the call. Overwhelmed by emotions that had lagged behind, all I could do was cry out. 5 years have passed since then. I had a cat in my lap, dozing off in front of my laptop. The cat was also purring contentedly in sleep. Today is my day off, but there is still a bit of work left from what I brought home. Oh no, this won't get the work done. I felt guilty, but I had to move the cat off my lap. Just as I reached out, my phone started to ring. An unfamiliar number was displayed on my smartphone. Thinking it could be work-related, I answered the call without any suspicion. Hello, Luna, long time no see. I instantly knew who it was and froze. The distinctive way of speaking was unmistakably my sister's. "It's you, Luna, isn't it? I can tell just from your initial hello. After all, I'm your big sister." 5 years had passed, which should make Susan 34. A smirk formed at the corner of my mouth at her unchanging way of talking. "You're just the same. By the way, I came home and there's a hotel standing. Did you sell the house?" "That's none of your business." "Oh, come on. It's quite a grand hotel, huh? You must have made a good chunk of change, huh?" Getting fed up, I was about to end the call when she started to chatter about her current situation. According to Susan, she had blown through the inheritance in about 2 years. Now she even had a considerable amount of debt. Even Brian, who she's still hanging around, seemed to be drowning in debt. I was speechless. Honestly, I couldn't care less. "So, lend me some money." Against Susan's yelling, I answered calmly. "I've always wondered why Grandpa distributed his estate that way. But on the day you took Brian from me and cut ties, I understood." I started talking slowly. 5 years ago, when Brian broke up with me, I was crushed. After crying my heart out, I sat dazed in my room, staring into space. "I'm such a fool," as I murmured. Large tears began to spill again. My gaze fell on a painting I had made as a child and had gifted to my grandfather. He had framed it and kept it hanging lovingly. Rising unsteadily, I picked up the painting. "Grandpa." When the feelings of nostalgia and loneliness welled up and tears started to come, I felt something drop from the back of the frame. Picking it up, I saw it was a fresh sheet of notepaper addressed to me. I remembered how, when I was little, I used to stick notes on the back of this frame and exchange secret messages with my grandfather. It was like a family journal, really. Knowing that I was to inherit the house, he probably figured I'd find this note. I'm glad I noticed. I shuddered at the thought that I might have left it unnoticed. To Luna. The date on the letter was just before my grandfather passed. "I knew you'd definitely notice this letter. Right now, you're probably wondering why I distributed my estate in such a manner. Cash to your sister and an old house and land for you. It may seem like I favored Susan, but that's not the case. Despite any claims of favoritism, I wanted to leave most of my estate to you, who cared for me till the end. I finally understood what had been bothering me. No matter what Grandpa thought more of me, huh? I'm sure I was deeply hurt by Susan's words at that time, despite having loved my grandfather more. A kind of jealousy. I continued to read the letter. But Susan would not be satisfied with a regular division. This child, even as her grandfather, I must admit, she's terribly greedy. Exactly, Grandpa. She even took my boyfriend from me. That's what I want to tell him in my heart. That's why I arranged it this way. If at first glance Susan appears to have received the better deal, she won't pay attention to your share. According to Grandpa's letter, the value of this land in our area is continuously increasing due to ongoing urban development. As of the time I'm writing this, it's not worth Susan's $20 million yet, but the value of this land will surely increase in the future. When I read this far, my eyes widen in surprise. You can live here if you're attached to it, or you can sell it when its value rises enough to make a good profit. All I want is for you to be happy. When I finished conveying the content of the letter, Susan clicked her tongue and said, "Hag." I lived in that house for a while, but when my marriage was settled, I decided to sell the house just like Grandfather's letter said. The land value had risen enough anyway. "I'm never lending you money." Susan seemed frustrated, but as if she had a good idea, she said, "Right. If you want, I can give Brian back to you, so help your sister. It's a good deal, right?" At this moment, I heard something snap inside of me. Enough is enough. You've been taken care of by Grandpa, and yet you haven't shown a hint of gratitude. I despise you for that, and you're not my sister anymore. Besides, I'm already married. I don't need Brian, and I don't even want to see his face. Stay out of my life for good." I said what I needed to say and hung up. I quickly set up call blocking, and my cat on my lap was cowering on the bed. I quickly picked up my cat and said, "I'm sorry." After that, it seems Susan contacted Brian, and they both stormed into our old house. Did they try to return Brian to me? There's a respectable inn there now, but they must have misunderstood something and were shouting that they were my relatives, even though I just sold the land and had nothing to do with it. It's simple for those two. I sold the land and an inn was built, so I must be the owner of the inn. Of course, the staff reported it to the police. The two of them were arrested because they had destroyed several items in the inn. Furthermore, it was discovered that they had been committing marriage fraud for money in the past. It seems they'll be sent to prison together. I was also questioned by the police, but I was able to prove that I had no involvement quickly as we were estranged and were released. As my husband, who came to pick me up, and I were walking through the station, we heard screaming and turned our gaze. There were Susan and Brian, who looked completely different. Fortunately, they didn't notice us. Both of them had messy hair, worn-out clothes, and looked nothing like the two people I remember, especially Susan, who never skipped her makeup and fashion and looked even more different. They were probably being moved into a different location. My husband and I silently locked lips as we stood there watching my two beautiful boys dance away, a little downtrodden. I took his hand and we left the police station. "Are you okay?" My husband is always considerate and gave me a gentle gaze. "I'm okay. I have you and this little one." I patted my rather prominent belly as well, smiled back. A new addition to our family is being created in my belly. There is one thing more valuable than money. That and what I hope to show our child, with my husband by my side.
I'm Maya. I was always the type of person to stick to a plan, college, job, save up maybe my own little place I could call mine one day. The irony of me working in a travel agency makes you wonder. I spent around 8 hours surrounded by posters showcasing places that I never visited. It was work, home, sleep, and repeat. Bam! The next thing you know, I got a call from an old college buddy of mine, Jake. "Hey Maya, long time no see. Guess what? Throwing a camping trip this weekend." The second I picked up, he blurted out, "You need to come." "Yeah, but..." "No buts, Maya. It's just a weekend. You need a break. What's the point of selling dreams if you never live one?" He was pushing, knowing I'd cave. All right. Send me the details." I gave in, already regretting my decision as we hung up. But a part of me felt a spark of excitement, something I hadn't felt in a long while. The rest of the week was a blur of preparations. I dug out my old camping gear, bought some new hiking boots, my old ones were a lost cause, and by Friday, I was as ready as I'd ever be. Saturday morning arrived, chilly and clear. I drove to the meeting spot, a little coffee shop where our group was gathering before heading out. Jake was already there, larger than life, greeting everyone with boisterous hellos. He introduced me around. "This is Maya, guys. We went to college together. She's a pro at booking your dream vacation but never takes one herself." The group laughed, and I managed a tight smile. Jake was just like I remembered, always the center of attention. As we set off, the reality of what I'd signed up for hit me. The path was steeper than I expected, the backpack was killing my shoulders, and those new boots felt like a torture device. About an hour in, I was seriously questioning my life choices. That's when I noticed him. Alex. Alex was a friend of a friend, tall with an easy smile, walking alongside me. "First time hiking in a while?" he asked, eyeing my awkward steps. "Is it that obvious?" I gasped a bit. He laughed. "Here, let me help you with your pack. It'll make the climb easier." Reluctantly, I handed it over, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. "Thanks, I guess. I'm not as fit as I thought." As we walked, Alex shared stories of his own travels and misadventures. He had this easy way about him that made the hours pass faster. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. By the time we set up camp, I was exhausted but exhilarated. The evening passed with campfire stories and marshmallows. Alex stayed close, and we talked late into the night, the stars our only light. Waking up in a tent wasn't my usual start to a Sunday, but there I was with a stiff back and the chirping of birds outside. The day promised more hiking, and honestly, I was dreading it. Pulling on my boots, which were now slightly less torturous than the day before, I stepped out into the crisp morning air. Alex was already up, brewing coffee over a small camp stove. "Morning, Maya," he said with a smile as I approached. "Morning. Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," I replied, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. "What's that smell?" "Coffee. Thought it might help kickstart the day. Want some?" "God, yes. Thanks," I said, accepting the cup and sipping carefully. The warmth was comforting, and the caffeine started to seep into my bones. As the others began to stir, Jake called us to gather around. "All right, team. Today's trek is a bit tougher, so let's stick together, and hey, no one gets left behind." I glanced at Alex, silently pleading for him to stick close. He seemed to understand and nodded subtly. We started off at a good pace, the trail leading us through denser forest. The terrain was rough with roots and rocks that demanded attention. Alex walked beside me, offering a steady stream of conversation that kept my mind off my aching muscles. "So, Maya, what made you finally say yes to a trip like this?" he asked as we navigated a particularly tricky stretch. I laughed. Jake wouldn't stop nagging. He said I was becoming part of the furniture at the office. Guess I needed to prove him wrong. The path eventually opened up to a beautiful clearing with a view of the mountains beyond. We stopped for a break, everyone catching their breath and taking in the scenery. I dropped my pack with a thud and flopped down beside it. Alex sat down next to me, handing me a water bottle. "You're doing great, Maya." "Seriously, thanks, Alex. This is tougher than I thought. But I'm glad I came," I admitted, looking around at the natural beauty. We spent a few moments in comfortable silence, just enjoying the peace of the wilderness. It was new for me, this quiet companionship, and I found myself not wanting the moment to end. As we got up to continue, Alex offered his hand to help me up. "Ready for the next leg?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, accepting his hand. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of greenery and occasional wildlife sightings. As we packed up to head back to camp, Alex lingered behind with me. "Hey, Maya, there's a small waterfall not far from here. Want to check it out before we head back?" I hesitated, my body screaming for rest, but then I nodded. "Sure, why not? Lead the way." That little detour, just the two of us, felt like an adventure within an adventure. The waterfall was breathtaking, a hidden gem tucked away from the beaten path. Standing there, watching the water cascade down, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the raw beauty of the place, or maybe it was the person by my side, but I knew I would remember this moment for a long time. Life has a funny way of turning your plans upside down. 2 years after that camping trip, Alex and I got married. It was a simple wedding, nothing too fancy but filled with joy. Well, mostly. His mum, Mrs. Collins, stood there with her lips pinched tight, barely cracking a smile. She never thought I was good enough for her son and never missed a chance to let me know. Fast forward 3 more years, and Alex came home one day with a big idea. "Maya, we should move in with my mum. Since Dad passed, she's all alone in that big house, and I worry about her." I was chopping vegetables for dinner and almost nicked my finger with the knife. "Live with your mum? Alex, you know how she feels about me." He sighed, scrubbing a hand through his hair. "I know it's not ideal, but she's my mum. We need to look after her." The thought of living under the same roof as Mrs. Collins made my stomach turn, but I loved Alex. "Okay, we'll try it for you." The day we moved in, Mrs. Collins greeted us with a forced smile and a list of house rules she'd written down. I tried to keep things light, but the tension was thick. That evening, while Alex was setting up our bedroom, his mum cornered me in the kitchen. "Maya, I hope you understand that this is still my home. I expect certain standards to be maintained," she said, eyeing the way I was organising the pantry. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I'll do my best, Mrs. Collins," she huffed. "Please at least try to keep things clean and don't think you can just lounge around all day. There's plenty to be done." Her words stung, but I swallowed the hurt. "I'll make sure everything's up to your standards." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Living with Mrs. Collins was as tough as I had feared. She had a comment for everything I did, from the way I cooked meals, "Too spicy, Maya, not everyone likes to burn their tongue," to how I did the laundry. "You're folding those sheets all wrong." One particularly rough day, Alex came home to find me scrubbing the kitchen floor, tears of frustration welling up. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, kneeling beside me. "It's just your mum. I'm trying, Alex, but it feels like she's never happy with anything I do." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "I'm sorry, Maya. I see how hard you're trying. Let me talk to her, okay?" The talk must have had some effect, because Mrs. Collins backed off a bit. She was still cold, but the constant criticism slowed down, slowly, very slowly. We settled into a tense routine. Then came the discussion about children. I wanted to start a family, but month after month nothing happened. I was worried and brought it up one evening while Alex and I were washing dishes. "Alex, do you think there's something wrong? Should we see a doctor?" He didn't look at me, focusing on a stubborn spot on a plate. "I don't know, Maya. Let's not rush things. These things take time." "But it's been years," I pressed, feeling the sting of tears. He put down the dish and took my hands. "Hey, let's just be patient, okay? We have a lot on our plates right now." As tough as things were, I found small ways to make that old house feel like home. I started a garden, something I'd always wanted to do. Mrs. Collins even complimented it once, though it was more of a grunt than actual praise. One afternoon, while I was pruning the roses, she came out and watched me for a few minutes. "You have a knack for this gardening thing," she remarked almost begrudgingly. I smiled, wiping sweat from my brow. "Thanks, Mrs. Collins. It's nice to hear that from you." One day, Alex asked me to quit my job, and I unexpectedly agreed, becoming a housewife. Every day was a juggle between household chores, taking care of Mrs. Collins, and dealing with the undercurrents of a changing family dynamic. Alex's behaviour had started to shift too. He was staying late at work, often too tired to talk when he got home, and on many nights he just crashed in the spare room, mumbling about needing to catch up on sleep. One evening, while I was fixing a leaky faucet, Alex's sister Lydia dropped by unannounced. "Still playing the devoted wife in this dreary old tomb," Lydia sneered as she looked around the dimly lit kitchen. "It's not that bad, Lydia. It'll grow on you," I shot back, trying not to let her get under my skin. She laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "It's just like you, isn't it? Old-fashioned and lonely. Fits you perfectly." Before I could respond, she turned to her mother. "Mum, I need some money. The usual stuff, you know how it is." Without a moment's hesitation, Mrs. Collins pulled out her checkbook and wrote her a check, her hand shaky but determined. It wasn't long after Lydia's visit that Mrs. Collins's health took a turn for the worse. One afternoon, she called me into her room, her voice weaker than usual. "Maya, can you help me with my bath? I can't do it myself today." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Of course, Mrs. Collins." As I helped her, careful and gentle, her usual sharpness melted away. By the end, tears were rolling down her cheeks. "Thank you, dear. My own daughter, she won't even help me." "Don't mention it. It's okay," I said, helping her back to her room. That day marked a change in our relationship. She started treating me more like a daughter than a reluctant houseguest. But as we grew closer, Alex grew more distant. One day, I overheard him on the phone talking about an apartment he had bought near his work. Curious, I asked him about it later. "Show me the apartment sometime," I suggested, trying to keep my tone light. "It's just a regular place, Maya. Nothing to see. It's not a museum," he snapped, shutting down the conversation abruptly. His coldness stung, but what hurt more came a few days later when Mrs. Collins called me to her side, whispering with urgency. "He bought that apartment with my money, Maya. Put it in my name, even uses my savings for the bills." There, I felt my heart sink. Why would he do that? She shook her head, her eyes sad. "I don't know, dear, but be careful. There's more going on with Alex than we know." Mrs. Collins, my unlikely ally through recent tough times, had begun to see me as more than just the woman her son had married. Maybe it was the countless days spent together, or maybe it was the genuine help I showed, but she started treating me kindly, and that was new. One lazy, sunlit afternoon as we sat in the parlour, I broached a topic I'd been mulling over for weeks. "Mrs. Collins, have you ever thought about sprucing up this old place?" She looked around, her gaze lingering on peeling wallpaper and faded photographs. "I suppose it could use a bit of touching up," she admitted, her voice softening with a rare hint of nostalgia. Encouraged, I pushed forward. "I was thinking more than just touching up. What if we really changed things around, made it brighter, more lively?" She raised an eyebrow, a spark of interest in her eyes. "What did you have in mind?" "Maybe some new paint, fixing up the old furniture, getting some new curtains. It could really lighten up the place," I said, warming to the idea. Mrs. Collins nodded slowly. "That sounds nice. It's been ages since anything changed around here. Do you think you could handle that?" "I'd love to," I assured her, excitement building in my chest. The next day, armed with paint samples and fabric swatches, I set about transforming the old mansion. The work was hard, but it felt good to be doing something tangible, something that would breathe new life into these tired walls. As I was stripping wallpaper in the dining room, Mrs. Collins came in, leaning on her cane. "You're really going all out, aren't you?" she observed, watching as I scraped off layers of the past. "I am," I replied, smiling despite the sweat on my brow. "This place is going to feel completely different." She chuckled, a sound so rare I almost didn't recognize it. At this rate, I might not even recognize my own home. Days turned into weeks, and the house slowly transformed. The dark, drab colours gave way to bright, welcoming tones. Old, musty carpets were removed, revealing beautiful hardwood floors that we polished until they shone. Alex was hardly around, his visits growing even more infrequent. But one evening, he came home as I was draping new curtains in the living room. "What the hell is all this? What have you done to my house?" he demanded, his eyes darting around the changed space. At that moment, Mrs. Collins entered the room. "It's my house, Alex. I want it to be nice. Ma is doing a wonderful job." Alex looked between us, his frustration palpable. "Fine," he snapped, before stomping off to other parts of the house. Despite his reaction, we pressed on. Mrs. Collins and I picked out new furniture, replacing the old heavy pieces with lighter, more modern choices that still respected the house's character. Every new addition seemed to lift her spirits and mine too. Life had just started settling down after the renovation when Mrs. Collins's health took a sudden turn for the worse. One morning, I found her slumped over in her chair, barely able to speak. The panic button was hit, and within hours we were in the emergency room where doctors buzzed around her, finally declaring she'd suffered a stroke. She was whisked away for treatment, and I found myself pacing the sterile, cold hallways of the hospital alone. Alex didn't show up, neither did Lydia. Mrs. Collins spent a couple of weeks in the hospital, but it was only me who visited every day. I'd sit by her bedside, holding her hand, talking about the house, trying to keep her spirits up while she stared blankly at the walls. Her body was weak, her spirit weaker. When she was finally discharged, she was a shell of her former self, confined to her bed. Her movements were slow and her speech slurred. It was on that first day back at home when Alex and Lydia decided to show their faces. They walked past me in the hallway straight to Mrs. Collins's room, where they began discussing her assets as though she wasn't lying right there. "Mum's got that savings account. We should look into that," Lydia was saying, flipping through some papers she shouldn't have had. "Yeah, and the house. We need to start thinking about what to do with it," Alex chimed in, not even trying to lower his voice. Mrs. Collins's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling. Seeing her so vulnerable broke my heart. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Can you two stop? She's right here listening to all this." Alex turned on me, his face twisted in annoyance. "This is family business, Maya. Stay out of it." Lydia scoffed. "Yeah, just because you play nurse doesn't mean you have a say." Their words stung, but I wasn't about to let them bully me or her. "She is my family too, and I'm not going to let you two treat her like this." From that day on, I threw myself into caring for her. I read up on stroke recovery, learned exercises to help her regain mobility, and massaged her limbs to keep them from stiffening. Slowly, she started responding. It was painstaking and slow, but progress was made. She began eating on her own, a stubborn set to her jaw whenever she'd attempt to walk with my support. Alex and Lydia watched this recovery with thinly veiled dismay. It seemed every step forward for Mrs. Collins was a step away from whatever plans they'd concocted for her assets. One evening, as I helped Mrs. Collins back into bed after a particularly strenuous set of exercises, she looked up at me with more clarity than I'd seen in weeks. "Thank you, Maya," she murmured, her voice still weak but determined. "You're my real family." It had been a peaceful year in some ways, the mansion slowly feeling more like a home under my care. That peace shattered the morning I found Mrs. Collins passed away in her sleep. It was a quiet exit, fitting for the gentle side of her I'd come to know. The funeral was a surreal blur. I was greeting mourners in the parlour, still in a daze, when Alex walked in. The shock came not just from seeing him, he'd been increasingly absent over the past year, but from the woman who accompanied him, holding a toddler with another child tugging at her skirt. "This is my wife, Linda, and these are my children." Alex introduced them without a flinch. His words cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. Then he turned to me, his voice cold and sharp. "Maya, you need to leave. We'll be moving in." I stood there, stunned, trying to process his words when Lydia's laughter broke through my shock. Finally, this house will see some proper life again. Before I could respond, the notary, Mr. Hanson, called us together for the reading of the will. We moved into the living room, a heavy tension settling over us. Mr. Hanson opened his briefcase, pulling out the documents. "Let's proceed with the reading of Marjorie Collins's last will and testament." Alex and Lydia positioned themselves prominently, as if ready to claim their victory. I remained standing by the window, feeling the weight of the moment. "I, Marjorie Collins, declare this my last will and testament," Mr. Hanson read. "To Maya, who has been more than a daughter to me, I leave all my property, including the mansion and all my financial assets. Furthermore, the apartment purchased by my son Alex will also revert to Maya, as it was acquired with funds provided by me." The silence that followed was palpable. Alex's face turned red, his fists clenched. "This is ridiculous. You must have forced her into this, Maya." Lydia was quick to join in, her voice harsh and accusing. "You're nothing but a gold digger. Mum was old and confused. You took advantage of her." I felt my heart pounding, but I kept my calm. "I didn't force anyone. I cared for her when you wouldn't." Mr. Hanson cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "There is also a video statement from Marjorie, if you will," he said, setting up a laptop. The screen flickered and Mrs. Collins appeared, looking frail but resolute. "If you are hearing this, I am no longer here. I have left everything to Maya. In these past years, she has shown me kindness, compassion, and loyalty more than my own children ever did. This is my thank you to her, my final wish. The room was silent as the video ended. Alex looked as if he might explode with fury, while Lydia seemed to shrink, her earlier bravado evaporating. Alex turned to Mr. Hanson, his voice desperate. "We can contest this, right? There's got to be a way." Mr. Hanson closed the folder with a snap. "You can try, but Marjorie was of sound mind when she made these decisions. Everything is legally binding." After everything settled down, the first thing I did was finalize my divorce from Alex. The house, the apartment where he'd set up his little fantasy life, they were all legally mine now. Alex ended up drifting with his new family, bouncing from one rental to another. I heard about it from mutual friends, the whispers of his downfall circulating back to me, but I didn't take any pleasure in it. Lydia, too, had her own set of troubles. After betting on inheriting her mother's money and losing, she was swamped with debt. One afternoon, she showed up at my doorstep, her face haggard, her usual brashness gone. "Maya, I need help," she said straight out, no beating around the bush. "I've got nothing left." I looked at her, remembering all the harsh words, the sneers. "I can't help you, Lydia. You made your choices." She stared at me, a mix of anger and desperation in her eyes. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching us fall apart?" I shook my head, feeling a twinge of pity despite everything. "I don't enjoy any of this, Lydia, but you need to sort out your own mess." I decided to transform the old mansion into a small private hotel for tourists, calling it Marjorie's in memory of Mrs. Collins. It seemed fitting to honour her this way, keeping her love for the house alive by filling it with life and laughter again. I managed everything from renovations to marketing, pouring my heart into every detail, making sure that everything was perfect. One evening, sitting in the garden Mrs. Collins loved so much, I allowed myself to really think about the future. I planned expansions, special events, community activities. Marjorie's was not just going to be a hotel, it was going to be a vital part of the community, a place that brought people together. "You are not going to be useful around the house, huh? Then why fucking stay if that is the kind of wife you are?" I was left to sit there in stunned silence at what my mother-in-law had just said. His mother glared at me with this awful, seething look. "We have Francisco, and we do not want you anymore." "Really? Why are you always tired and never seem to get things done? Why is that?" My sister-in-law, who never helps around the house, said to me in a bored voice, "Francisco, this is too much. Don't you think your mother's and sister's words are going overboard? I'm doing my best too." When I sought help from my husband, he responded with a demeaning attitude. "I agree with my mother and sister. I'm busy with work and I'm in trouble if you don't help with the chores. Besides, my relationship with the new part-time girl is progressing, and you're just baggage. Can you quickly pack and live somewhere else?" As I was shocked by Francisco's words, I checked the reactions of the three. They all seemed to blame me. A rage I couldn't put into words welled up in my chest. I took a deep breath, calmed myself, and said, "I understand. I need some time." My in-laws, who had relied on me so much until now, were starting to fall apart. "My name is Michelle. I'm 32 years old. I am working and I spend my days doing my best in both my job and household chores. Nowadays, it's not uncommon for women to continue working even after getting married, but I truly love my job, and I'm still striving at the company I joined right after college." One morning, as I was getting ready for work, my husband approached with a pleading look. "Michelle, can you take care of this?" What I received from my husband's hand was a file crammed with receipts and bills. "This again. You should manage your cafe's finances properly," I said with a smile, to which my husband Francisco responded with a slightly spoiled face. Sorry, but I'm really bad at that." I met Francisco in an unusual way. I was drawn to him while he was working part-time at a cafe I frequented. After a few chats, we naturally began dating and eventually talked about marriage. Now Francisco owns that cafe. However, contrary to how he runs the cafe, he's not good at paperwork and always asks me to handle the accounting. As I sighed, my mother-in-law chimed in. Michelle, I suddenly feel like eating Chinese food tonight. Sure, but could you rinse the rice a bit? Well, why don't you come home early and do it? Plus, Mia and the kids are coming this weekend, so we have to think about their meals. All right, I got it. I nodded to my mother-in-law's request and hurriedly left the house. Before getting married, I was excited about my new life with Francisco, but he suggested, my mum's lonely by herself now, so why don't we all live together in our big house? So now I live with his mother. To put it lightly, she's not good at household chores. When we moved in, the house was a bit of a mess. After my father-in-law passed away, she started living on a pension, but she mostly spends it on eating out or taking out food. Francisco seems to think that housework is a woman's job, so it ends up being my full responsibility. Francisco's sister, Mia, occasionally brings her kids home. Every time she does, my to-do list grows, and I can't help but think, another chaotic weekend is approaching. Weekends are precious times to recover from the usual exhaustion. However, my sister-in-law's children would ask to play or complain about being hungry. I found myself preparing meals in the kitchen and also entertaining the children. Then my sister-in-law dropped a bombshell. Michelle, I'm getting divorced and will be moving back here with the kids next month. Surprised, I was so shocked I momentarily lost words. Really? Yes, do you have something to say? No, I was just thinking it must have been hard. When are you moving? I want to move as soon as possible. Well, surprised that my sister-in-law and her children would be moving in, I thought that maybe she would help, and household chores would be more manageable. We had a normal relationship, but I hoped that this would bring us closer and she would help with the chores. I spent every day with a positive attitude. However, reality had other plans. Perhaps because she grew up with my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law seemed to live a life devoid of housework. She spent most of her time lounging on the sofa, watching TV, and always had some snack with her. Watching her, I realized her neglect of housework might have contributed to her divorce. Now, with the added responsibility of preparing meals for her children and making lunches for kindergarten, my workload increased and my free time diminished. I had hoped she would help, but it was very disappointing that it turned out to be a swing and a miss. Then there was a time when my work at the company suddenly became hectic. Every day I would start work early and do overtime. When I returned home exhausted, the room would be overflowing with things, with no space to even walk. Every time I came home and saw the scene, waves of fatigue would wash over me. On top of that, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law would complain. Is dinner ready yet? Or, why are you home so late? When I couldn't manage household chores, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law would say things like, Michelle, there's a mountain of laundry waiting. Don't slack off just because you're busy, in a cold manner. Mother-in-law, I'm really trying my best, I thought, but before my sister-in-law could say anything, I often chose to remain silent. Michelle, are you standing up to your mother-in-law? That's a bit bold, but for the sake of the children, please try a little harder to make homemade meals, my sister-in-law said. If you have so much free time at home, why don't you help out once in a while? She continued. What? Doing household chores? Ha, ha. Francisco owns a store, so Michelle doesn't need to work, right? If that's the case, maybe you should try a little harder at home. Behind their words, I felt the pressure that I should be doing more. That night, at the peak of my stress, I decided to speak my mind to Francisco. I've been so busy lately, and neither my mother-in-law nor my sister-in-law are helping out with household chores, so it's really hard. Michelle, you're not speaking ill of our family, are you? Francisco's eyes sharpened a bit, and I braced myself. That's not what I mean, but it's hard for me to do everything by myself. If you helped out once in a while, things would be a little easier for me. I'm busy managing the store. It's different from a regular job. Housework is the wife's responsibility, right? Even so, a bit disappointed by his response, I sat and thought for a while. A good idea suddenly popped into my head. I had a brainstorming moment. Could this work? I silently pumped my fist. I immediately grabbed my smartphone, opened my favorite online shop, and started adding necessary items to the cart. After completing the purchase, I went to bed satisfied. A few days later, my new electronic household appliances, which would become my lifelines, were delivered to our home. The latest washing machine, a cleaning robot that cleans every corner of the room, and a rice cooker that cooks delicious rice without much effort. Each of them was a savior, making my daily life just a little bit easier and more enjoyable. As I was setting up the new washing machine, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law suddenly appeared with surprised expressions. "Wait, Michelle, you got such a fancy washing machine? But the old one was still good, wasn't it?" Smiling gently, I replied, "The old one took a bit too long, and I heard this new one shortens the laundry time." Their gaze then shifted to the cleaning robot and the new kitchen appliances. "See, I've also upgraded these," I said, showing them off a bit. "All these things, cleaning robots and convenient cooking appliances. Michelle, come over here for a moment," my mother-in-law said. Inside the room, seeing the slightly surprised expressions of my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, I smirked to myself. Francisco sat next to me, and the four of us began our discussion. "Hey, why did you buy so many things?" My mother-in-law raised her voice. "Do you really need all these new appliances? Isn't it just because you want to make things a bit easier?" She continued, "Well, I thought it would be nice if things around the house could run a bit more smoothly," I replied with a slightly troubled expression. But my mother-in-law chimed in, "Relying too much on machines? Aren't we interrupting the—" The sister-in-law waved her hand. "But, Michelle, the appliances we had can still be used. Francisco is working hard managing his store. Maybe you should be more frugal." Francisco nodded in agreement with his sister. In a quiet voice, I murmured, "Maybe you're right." There was a hint of anger in my mother-in-law's eyes. "Are you even considering our household?" I stumbled over my words. "I really am, but I'm just a bit exhausted." My mother-in-law raised her voice. "Enough! I can't believe you're our daughter-in-law." My sister-in-law, with a disgusted look, added, "I'll watch over Francisco. We don't need someone like you here." When I looked at Francisco, he said coldly, "I understand what Mum and Sis are saying. It's a bit difficult to have a wife who doesn't do housework." Looking at Francisco's face, my heart felt heavy. He continued with a cold smile. "I have my own store, so I decide how to use my money. But being with someone who spends on anything and everything might be difficult. Why has it come to this?" Despite being shaken by his words, I looked into Francisco's eyes and counted. "Also, I've noticed things have been going well with that new part-time girl. She's more attractive than you are now. Maybe it's time for you to pack up and find a new place to live." A fire of anger surged within me. Although I didn't voice it, it was clear in my eyes. But taking a step back and calming myself, I replied after taking a deep breath, "All right, I'll look for a new home." "That's better. Finally, you understand? I'll feel much better without you around." Hearing those words, I felt a surge of indescribable emotion. I took out something I had already prepared from a corner of the room. "Well, let's send it with this." In my hand was a divorce paper already filled out. I had it on hand, anticipating that something might happen someday. "Oh, you had this prepared beforehand," Francisco said. "Well, it doesn't matter. I'll sign it. Enjoy your new life." Smugly, Francisco signed the papers. That night, I moved to a nearby weekly rental apartment with just the bare essentials and the divorce paper. No one tried to stop me when I left. Did they ever really care about me? After submitting the divorce paper at the city office, I found a stylish apartment to start fresh. During this time, an unexpected opportunity came my way, a promotion I had been putting off because of my family situation. I seized this chance and began working as a section manager. Every day, as I dedicated myself entirely to my job, I felt a renewed sense of accomplishment. In the midst of these busy days, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was my former mother-in-law. I thought, we have nothing to do with each other anymore, right? And without checking her message, I swiped to dismiss the call. My new life had begun, and I wouldn't look back at the past. A year flew by. One weekend, as I was relaxing in my room listening to my favourite music, my phone rang again. To my surprise, it was my former mother-in-law. Wondering what she wanted after all this time, I picked up. "Hello, is something wrong?" I asked. "Michelle, I finally got through. I didn't think you would answer after so many calls." "Well, it's been a while. What's going on?" She hesitated a moment and then asked, "How's your new life?" Despite her probing tone, I replied cheerfully, "It's great. I love my new apartment and work is going smoothly. I even got promoted and am living freely." "That's good. Michelle, can you come back home?" I was taken aback and blurted out, "Why?" "We're struggling financially." I thought to myself, I knew it, and responded, "Carly, Francisco's cafe only makes about $1,000 a month, right? If no one else in the family works, things could be tough." "You knew about that?" "Yes, Francisco's cafe wasn't doing well. I was fully aware of its financial situation since I handled all the accounting. But he pretended to be the successful owner without understanding the real state of his business. It was almost laughable how oblivious he was. I handled all the finances and procurement, so of course I knew." She seemed shocked. "You knew and didn't tell us, and we didn't know you were doing so well in such a big company, or that you were contributing so much to the household expenses." "Yes, I contributed more than $3,000 every month. Thanks to that, you all managed. The truth was, to bridge the gap in Francisco's business losses, I used my salary." He seemed completely unaware of the situation, and after I left, it seemed reality hit hard. "Michelle, can you please come back?" Curious, I asked, "So how's Francisco's cafe doing now?" She sighed. "We might have to close soon. The part-time workers keep quitting," I said with a bit of an inward smirk. "With that slightly sloppy management style, it's hard to keep it going for long, isn't it? His little bit of pride doesn't help, not doing proper work. I mean, how many women out there do you think would be willing to support a guy like that?" My former mother-in-law was momentarily at a loss for words given my somewhat sarcastic comment. Suddenly she said, "Wait, I'm a bit busy now. Since you left, the house is a mess. It's chaotic with things everywhere." "Wait, what do you mean?" I asked. She described the disarray of their home, with belongings scattered everywhere, looking like a storeroom. Without anyone to cook, they were eating out, which was costing a lot. The washing machine broke down, and there was no room in the budget to buy a new one. "Actually, the appliances that you took back, I was really relying on them," my former mother-in-law said. "Huh? Why is that? Those were for my convenience. Besides, I bought them myself, so it's okay for me to take them back, right?" "Yeah, I guess so. But I never realized housework was this challenging," my former mother-in-law said with a firm tone. "With 3 adults in the house, how can it be that hard? What are Francisco and your daughter doing?" A hint of fatigue could be heard in her voice. "As for Francisco, his staff members have been quitting, and sales have plummeted. As soon as he found out, he became really downcast and has just been lazing around at home." "What? But Francisco used to spend his money from the store without any restraint, right? On top of that, Mia doesn't help at all. She doesn't do anything around the house and even gets her allowance from me. To be honest, living on just my pension for the 3 of us is really hard." "Mia once told me that I was unnecessary because she was there," I responded with a hint of sarcasm. My former mother-in-law desperately said, "Michelle, we're really in trouble. Living on just my pension for the 3 of us is quite tough. I have no intention of returning to that house. It must be hard living with all the baggage." She seemed to be at a loss for words. Seeing her like this made me feel a bit sorry for her. But as I was about to hang up, my former mother-in-law seemed eager to say something. "Michelle, I'm really sorry. Can you reconsider us?" Her voice sounded a bit exhausted. I wonder if we can ever spend days together with smiles again, she said. Huh? Was it that hard without me? I replied with a mix of surprise and calmness. After a short pause, my former mother-in-law took a deep breath. Yes, there's actually an issue with the property tax. We might have to let go of the house. I see, but I really don't want to get involved anymore. Decide what you're going to do with your family. I hung up without waiting for her next words. After that, I set it up so I wouldn't receive any more calls from her. In my room, holding my favorite mug filled with aromatic coffee, I enjoyed my time alone, looking at the outside scenery. A smile spontaneously appeared on my face. A few months later, when I passed by the cafe where Francisco used to work, I noticed the place was now quiet and empty. Recalling its past liveliness, I felt a bit nostalgic. It seems they really closed the shop. While walking around the old town, I became curious about my former in-laws' house and saw a sold sign. Coincidentally, I bumped into an old neighbor in town. According to her, those three had quickly sold their house and moved to a small apartment nearby. In their new home, there were always loud arguments and even the smell of garbage. It seems the neighbors are quite bothered, and it has become a bit of local gossip. It must be tough for them, I thought, but with a bit of effort, life can change. I wonder why they don't try. As I gazed at the old house, these thoughts wandered in my mind. A lot has happened to me since then, but I'm living each day to the fullest. In fact, a handsome guy from my workplace confessed, saying, "I really admire your hard-working nature." Now we're enjoying our dates, and I'm really looking forward to what the future holds. If I get married again, I really want to be happy. I'm feeling very excited about it now. Hey there, I'm Emily, a newly 29-year-old. Many years ago, I did the incredibly stupid thing of hitching myself to a man with more issues than mental space. I had the romantic notion that love would save everything. I felt that I could be the one to teach him how worthy he was. Boy, was I wrong. Love is powerful, but it does not have the magical ability to teach a person to love themselves. My ex, I'll call him Joseph, was very intent on making his rents happy. I am not talking in the regular old wants to please my parents, proud. This insatiable need for their approval was so deeply ingrained, it shaped everything he did and seemed to be the ruler by which his very identity had become measured. Now about his parents, whom we'll call Mr. and Mrs. Ellis to keep things anonymous. They were a classic case of parents who didn't really engage with their son's life, leaving him desperate for their attention and approval. It was truly sad to see. I quickly figured out that I couldn't fill the emotional gap left by his parents. What's worse, Joseph had this terrible habit of blowing our savings on whatever his parents wanted. Yes, I'm talking about over-the-top gifts, fancy vacations, and all kinds of splurges that were completely unnecessary. Our money seemed to flow directly into Mr. and Mrs. Ellis's pockets, making their disregard even more frustrating for me. This reckless spending was a constant source of fights between us. It felt like I was competing with his parents for his priorities, and it was draining our marriage. Despite the turmoil and never-ending disagreements, my care for Joseph didn't waver. I hoped he could escape the unrealistic expectations of his parents and discover true joy within himself. Yet it became painfully clear that my love alone wasn't enough to pull him from the grasp of their harmful influence. Brace yourselves, because this roller coaster story takes an even sharper turn. One day, Joseph came to me with a serious look, hinting he had something major to share. Having been through many ups and downs with him, I braced myself for what was next, unaware of the bombshell about to be dropped. As Joseph started the conversation, I had a gut feeling it would escalate into our biggest disagreement yet. "Emily, there's something crucial I need to discuss," he said, setting a serious tone. "What's going on?" I inquired, already tensing up for what might come next. "It's about my parents. They're retiring soon. I've been thinking of gifting them a luxury vacation as a surprise. It's going to cost a pretty penny, he shared with a mix of excitement and apprehension. That sounds lovely, as long as the money is coming from your personal savings. I really don't want to dip into our joint savings again, I said, hoping to avoid another financial argument. I don't have enough to cover it myself. I was hoping to use some of our savings, Joseph admitted, looking hopeful yet anxious. Joseph, if it's beyond what we can comfortably afford, maybe we should reconsider the expense, I suggested gently, trying to bring him back to reality. But he quickly lost his cool. You just don't get it, Emily. I love my parents. I want to do something extraordinary for them. Love isn't about counting every penny spent, it's about grand gestures, he argued passionately. I countered, but love is also about being there for each other and making sacrifices together, not at the cost of our financial stability. This trip might mean a lot to them, but we have to think about our future too. Joseph was insistent, though. I have to do this for them. I thought you, of all people, would understand. They're everything to me. And you're everything to me, Joseph, but we have to be practical. We can't just use up all our savings on one trip, I reasoned, hoping to find some middle ground. He accused me of being selfish, unable to see the importance of his gesture. It's not about being selfish, it's about being sensible and planning for what's ahead, I explained, wondering just how much he planned to spend. When he said he needed all of it, my heart sank. All of our savings? Joseph, that's just reckless, I said, shocked by the magnitude of his request. You're being heartless, he retorted, convinced I couldn't understand his desire to please his parents. No, Joseph, I'm being realistic. We can't afford to give away $85,000 on a whim, I said, my patience wearing thin. His casual mention of getting the money back later only added to my frustration. Really, Joseph, that's not how this works, I snapped back, my sarcasm barely veiling my disbelief. It was clear we were at an impasse. Our views on love, responsibility, and financial security were clashing more than ever. The argument reached a fever pitch. Our voices weren't the only things escalating. Suddenly, objects were taking flight, shattering upon impact as if to punctuate our heated exchange. In this chaos, Joseph dropped a bombshell, declaring that if I couldn't back him up on this, he wanted a divorce. He probably expected me to panic, to claw desperately at the fragments of our marriage, but I didn't. Instead, I gathered all the serenity and resolve I could muster, and simply responded, "Okay, Joseph, if that's truly what you desire." The astonishment on his face was a sight to behold. He had anticipated tears, begging even, but what he got was my unwavering stance. I was done indulging and fostering his fantasies. If he wished to squander his future chasing shadows, he was free to do so without me. I didn't mince my words. I laid it all bare. I made it clear that his endless quest for his parents' approval was as futile as trying to shield oneself from a storm with just an umbrella, an exercise in futility. He attempted to counter, but a simple raise of my hand stopped him cold. I declared my exhaustion from battling for a love ensnared by unrealistic expectations and an unending thirst for validation. Go ahead, spend your fortune chasing after those who hardly glance your way, I told him, firm in my resolve to end the cycle of letdowns and empty promises. And just like that, the harsh truth struck him, the grim reality of our predicament finally dawning on him. Our marriage had deteriorated into a war zone, and it was time to hoist the white flag and seek peace on individual paths. A month has passed since the divorce was finalized, and I can honestly say the feeling of liberation is utterly exhilarating. Gone are the days of grieving, no more endless disputes over finances or yearning for approval that was never ours to win. Now I'm breathing freely, freed from the heavy load of his doubts that once shadowed my days. The sun seems to shine a bit more brightly with each new day. True, Joseph made attempts to sneak back into my life, cloaked in concern and queries about my well-being. Yet, I could easily see through his facade. There was no way I was going to fall for his ploys once more. As the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I decisively turned away from his efforts to reignite any spark that was once there. I had realized I'd invested too much in trying to repair someone uninterested in changing. It was high time I shifted the focus to my growth and joy. Rebuilding wasn't a walk in the park, let me be clear. Splitting our shared assets and getting accustomed to a different financial reality demanded patience and resilience. I was used to a certain way of living, but adapting wasn't foreign to me. I embraced the hard work required to reconstruct my life anew, discovering a strength and independence I hadn't known was within me. Rekindling old friendships, diving back into hobbies I'd put on the back burner, and discovering new interests made the world feel vast and full of possibilities. I was keen to make the most of this fresh start. Certainly, there were moments filled with self-doubt and solitude, and adjusting to a new budget was a hurdle. The wounds from a dissolved marriage don't heal overnight. Yet, with each day that passed, I found comfort in the fact that I was no longer sacrificing my happiness to cater to someone else's insecurities. The ease with which I moved forward might have been a sign that I had been clinging to a lost cause for too long. It amazed me how much I could achieve once freed from that burden. So there I was, a month later, still navigating through adjustments but flourishing all the same. Joseph's incessant messaging had taken a new turn. He was now painting himself as the protagonist of a dramatic tale, claiming to be in danger and insisting on a meeting. Exhausted by his constant attempts to contact me, I decided it was time to confront the situation. In the midst of his ongoing messages, I called him. "Joseph, we've been through this. We're divorced. It's time for us to move on," I firmly stated. "Emily, please, I just need a moment to explain. I'm in serious trouble, and you're the only one I can turn to for help," he implored. Perhaps it was the long absence of his voice, or maybe he truly sounded scared, but against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. "Fine, but we're not meeting at my place. Let's go to that cafe we used to frequent. No tricks, understood?" I said. "Thank you, Emily. I promise I just need someone to listen. You're the only one who gets me," he replied, sounding relieved. "I know what you're thinking. Emily, why would you agree to meet Joseph after everything? Believe me, I question my own decision. Yet there's a part of us that sometimes gives in to a mix of curiosity and a lingering shred of concern. No matter how strong we are, I couldn't ignore his plea. Divorced or not, part of me still cared. So there we sat opposite each other in the charming bistro, surrounded by the comforting aroma of coffee. However, not even the pleasant scent could soften the thick air of tension between us. Observing Joseph with anxiety etched across his face and his attempts to pull at my heartstrings with those sorrowful eyes was almost amusing. This time, however, I wasn't swayed. Leaning back, I maintained a composed demeanor, ready to hear him out yet firmly in control. I had every intention of steering this conversation on my terms. "Okay, Joseph, you've got my attention for now. What's this danger you've supposedly found yourself in? And just to be clear, playing the hero isn't on my agenda anymore. I'm done cleaning up after your messes," I said, keeping my tone firm yet open. Joseph exhaled deeply, his face a mix of regret and desperation that was almost pitiful to see. However, I steeled myself against any emotional manipulation. "I know I've made mistakes before, Emily, but this situation is different. I've gotten involved with some seriously bad people. I owe them a lot of money, and they're not known for their patience," he confessed. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, skeptical of his dramatic story. "Really, Joseph? Dangerous people? Are we revisiting the tale of your imaginary friends who seem to attract trouble?" I couldn't hide my disbelief. Joseph's expression shifted to one of hurt and frustration, evidently hoping for a more sympathetic ear. "No, Emily, this isn't made up. I'm in deep trouble, and coming to you was my last resort," he insisted, his voice laced with desperation. "So let me guess. You spiraled after our divorce and now you're in debt. Was it that trip you mentioned?" I couldn't keep my voice down, drawing curious glances from other cafe patrons. I shot them an apologetic look, trying to regain my composure. "Look, I got caught up in something foolish, I admit, but now I'm in a mess that's bigger than I can handle alone," Joseph admitted, his gaze pleading. My frustration was close to boiling over. How could he waltz back into my life with yet another crisis? Yet, underneath the anger, I couldn't completely ignore the remaining shred of empathy for him. "How much are you in for?" I asked, bracing myself. $45,000, Joseph responded sheepishly. $45,000? Joseph, are you out of your mind? The cafe's patrons turned their heads, their stares sharp as knives. This time I didn't bother to offer an apology to the surrounding cafe patrons for my outburst. If they were in my shoes hearing what I was hearing, they'd likely react the same way. "Emily, please, I'm begging you. I've got nowhere else to turn. I know I've made a mess of things, but you're the one person who really believed in me," Joseph pleaded, his eyes shining with a sincerity that reminded me of the man I once loved. But those days were long gone, and my priority now was self-preservation, even if it meant walking away from him. "Don't pull at my heartstrings, Joseph. It's way too late for that. When you said you needed help at most $112,000, but $45,000. You've completely lost it," I responded, my voice a mix of disbelief and indignation. Overwhelmed, Joseph began to cry, oblivious to the uncomfortable glances from others. "Joseph, calm down. This isn't the place for a scene. What's going to happen if you don't pay this back?" I asked, trying to grasp the full extent of his predicament. "They're threatening to harm me, Emily. I'm not joking. This is really bad," he managed between sobs. Recognizing the gravity of his situation, I softened a bit. "Okay, Joseph, start from the beginning. Tell me everything," I urged. He recounted his story, explaining his desperate attempt to finance an extravagant trip for his parents. He'd relied on a friend who ultimately let him down, leaving him ensnared in significant debt. As he shared his tale, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, frustration at his recklessness and a begrudging amusement at the irony of his situation. "So you borrowed from dangerous people to impress your parents who haven't even acknowledged your efforts? That's what you're saying?" I asked, my tone laced with incredulity. Joseph's face fell, tears streaking down his cheeks as he acknowledged the bitter truth. "It's true. Since they went on that trip, it's as if I don't exist to them," he admitted, the remorse in his voice palpable. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for him. It was a harsh dose of reality for Joseph, facing the consequences of his decisions head-on. Yes, as much as I wanted to detach myself, seeing him so vulnerable and regretful stirred a compassion within me. "What a complex situation you've entangled yourself in," I said. "Indeed, Joseph, I know the last thing you want to hear is, 'I told you so,' but you did bring this upon yourself. I warned you that it wasn't a smart move. Worse yet, you chose to divorce me over it, and now here you are at a loss. You sought their approval, investing everything into their wishes, only to be met with silence. It's a tough lesson, but it's one you needed to learn." I said the words heavy with both concern and resignation. This situation was a difficult reality for both of us to face. Joseph had pinned his self-worth on people who couldn't value his sacrifices, and I had to accept that I couldn't shield him from his own decisions any longer. I had hoped that facing such dire consequences would make him see that I had always been in his corner. Reducing himself to merely someone who seeks parental approval was his undoing. As we sat there enveloped in silence, the weight of our past, filled with broken promises and dreams, pressed down on us. At that moment, I realized it was time to let go completely. No more second chances. No more trying to repair the irreparable. Joseph needed to confront the repercussions of his actions on his own, and I had to pursue my happiness elsewhere. I do hope you find a way out of this, Joseph, I offered, my voice tinged with a finality that surprised even me. You're not going to help? Joseph looked at me in disbelief. What the heck? No, I replied. Joseph, I can't help you. And why not? He asked. Because I don't have the resources to bail you out. And even if I could, taking a loan I'd spend a lifetime repaying, is out of the question. I can't afford to be as careless as you've been, I explained, my resolve firm. Come on, Emily, please, I'm begging you, he persisted, his desperation clear. Joseph, expecting me to jump in and solve this for you, especially with how you're acting, is unrealistic, I said, my patience wearing thin. Yeah, I did expect that. You're my ex-wife, not my enemy, he replied, still holding on to a sliver of hope. But it was clear our paths had diverged too far. My journey was now about finding peace and joy, independent of the chaos that wants to find us. And that's exactly where the problem lies, Joseph. You assume I'll always be around to pick up the pieces because that's what I've always done. I was your wife. It was natural for me to help you out of your troubles. But I can't and shouldn't keep doing that. It's not my job nor my responsibility. After everything, I don't owe you anything, especially considering how our hard-earned money was wasted on your unappreciative and toxic parents. It's because I love them, Joseph said. But I love myself too, and loving myself means doing what's best for me, which includes protecting my well-being, I responded. Joseph lowered his gaze, a sign of concession, understanding that the assistance he sought wouldn't come from me. Since it seems you're out of options, I'll offer you one piece of advice. Leave. Move somewhere far away where they can't reach you. If that's not something you can manage, then I'm not sure what more you expect from me. He sat there silent, his demeanor shifting to one of irritation, seemingly upset by my firm stance on not rescuing him this time. It's time for us to go our separate ways, Joseph. I can't allow myself to be pulled back into the turmoil of your life. We both deserve to find our peace, I said, hoping he'd understand. If you wished me well, you'd help, he retorted. Goodbye, Joseph. I'm changing my number, I declared, standing up to leave. As I walked away, Joseph remained seated, his expression a complex mix of feelings. It was a difficult yet essential step I had to take for the sake of my happiness and self-respect.